Government Business, Order of the Day number 4, National Broadband Network Companies Amendment, Commitment to Public Ownership Bill 2024, resumption of debate on the second reading.
And I call the Assistant Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I rise in continuation on this very, very important bill, the NBN Commitment to Public Ownership Bill. And I am pleased to be speaking in continuation and further on this particular bill, as the Albanese government is committed to keeping the NBN in public ownership, and we've made that very clear. And we want to keep it in public ownership because we believe the NBN needs to stay in full government ownership to support the ongoing upgrade of the network, which is absolutely vital, and to ensure ongoing regulatory oversight of NBN wholesale pricing, keeping broadband affordable for Australians, and particularly that those upgrades continue in regional and rural areas. I spoke about in my initial contribution the need to have constant upgrades of the NBN and connectivity is absolutely vital for our regional communities. And in a community like mine, there are so many reasons why it's absolutely vital. Of course, for business needs, we have a huge number of small businesses, the backbone of our local economy in my area of northern New South Wales. They need to be connected, and for many work purposes people need to have access to NBN connectivity. And of course, for a whole range of educational purposes it needs to be in place, and for many personal needs too. People need to have that access and connectivity there. But even more so in areas like mine and other areas that are prone to natural disasters, and we need to have and we need to know that we're able to access communication services. And certainly in our devastating floods of 2022, as I've spoken about here many times, one of the big issues was the lack of connectivity and communication. So ensuring we have as many services in place to assist our communities for all those reasons, everyday reasons that people need in communities, but even more so in regional areas. Now, the government's been making an ongoing investment in the NBN to bring the benefits of high-speed broadband to many more Australians. And this government's support includes a commitment of $2.4 billion to replace the deteriorating copper network with fibre, which provides 90% of Australians, around 10 million premises in the NBN fixed-line footprint, with access to faster and more reliable broadband. And we have been rolling that out in so many communities. And this investment's already delivering benefits with increased reliability, fewer faults and access to higher speeds. In addition, the government and NBN Co are delivering a $750 million investment to upgrade services in the NBN fixed wireless network, which has flow-on benefits to NBN satellite services as well, which are of course vital, very vital as well in many regional and rural areas. Now, as I mentioned before, the need to have these services in times of natural disasters, and in my area, particularly with those devastating floods, we have a whole series of measures that helps communities like mine. And of course, one of those is the STAND program, Strengthening Telecommunications Against Natural Disasters program. And of course, we've had installations right across the country, and in my area we've had installations at the Tweed Council Civic Centre Auditorium, also Mullumbimby Rural Fire Service Brigade, and it's important to have those STAND programs in place so that there can be a backup of NBN Sky Muster satellite services under that program and other programs that we're rolling out. Because, as I said, when we had our flood in 2022, there were absolutely no communications available at all. So the increase in that satellite access, the emergency backup satellite access, is so important for our area and any other areas that are unfortunately subject to those natural disasters, and there are many throughout the nation. So as we increase our investment in STAND and other programs, that helps those communities become more resilient, which is all part of the resilience programs and the mitigation measures that we need to have in place to assist our communities. And of course, Deputy Speaker, as well, the increase in towers that we see, particularly in regional areas, is vital too. We've had many in the north coast of New South Wales recently, and I have supported each and every one of those for all the reasons I outlined, and the need particularly for emergency services and for residents to have that access in natural disasters, but for their everyday lives. For example, thankfully underway, there is a tower at Newrybar which will be providing a whole lot of increased connectivity to many areas, particularly Bangalore, which has had horrific access to the NBN, and having that tower is the only way to ensure that those people can get and stay connected. So I have 100% supported that. Many years ago in my area we did, unfortunately, there was some very criminal activity which damaged one of the towers, and I spoke out at the time and absolutely condemned that. We need to have these towers in place in our regional areas, and I've supported all of those that are coming online in my community, and some of those, of course, do receive government funding, particularly through our peri-urban mobile program, and we announced one just a couple of weeks ago with funding for new mobile phone infrastructure for the Optus network in the Kingscliff area, another area that has had many issues in terms of connectivity. And these are only two of the towers that I mentioned. There are others, and we need to have them in place because it is obviously a lot more difficult in those regional areas in terms of being able to access all sorts of communication services. So I will continue to encourage all forms of communication that assist regional communities. Now, Deputy Speaker, through this bill, the National Broadband Network Companies Act will be amended to remove conditions enabling a future government to privatise NBN Co. And these changes reinforce in legislation our government's commitment. It is absolutely resolute. And the bill provides certainty. This bill provides certainty to everyone, to stakeholders, including so many those broadband consumers, the wider telecommunications industry, broadband retailers and NBN Co. The Commonwealth will continue to retain ownership of NBN Co. Very importantly, it provides certainty to all those consumers, and particularly those consumers in regional and rural Australia who are so dependent on their communications access. And this certainty supports the government's commitment for NBN Co to provide high-speed and reliable broadband connectivity for all Australians. That is our commitment, and that is why NBN Co must remain in public ownership. And Deputy Speaker, I commend the bill to the House.
I thank the Assistant Minister. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Fadden.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise tonight to speak against this bill, and in doing so, I thought it was worthy of just reflecting briefly on the history of where this came from. We'll recall that a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister, in question time, had a particularly bad afternoon, and he popped into the chamber late that night, issued an apology to the people of Australia, and then promptly the next day, absolutely out of nowhere, we find this new piece of bright, shiny legislation, which is nothing more, and was nothing more at the time, than a complete distraction to serve as the shiny ball so that people stopped thinking about either the Prime Minister's actions or what was actually going on in their life at the time. And what we ended up with is 6 pieces of paper that form this unbelievably unimportant piece of legislation. And I refer, for example, to some legislation that was introduced earlier today, just to give those viewing at home a little bit of a sense of what 7 pages might achieve. And earlier today we saw some legislation introduced that was 227 pages long. Substantial reform. So what on earth might we actually be trying to achieve, or would the government be trying to achieve, in these 7 pages? Well, I can tell you what they're trying to achieve. Really not much more than the complete distraction and smokescreen that I referred to. And, you know, it doesn't really take more than the front page of the headline for them to use, which is National Broadband Network Companies Amendments, brackets, commitment to public ownership, close brackets. And There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's your headline. That's the distraction. And what it shows is the level of desperation that this government has when they are 2 weeks out from the end of the year, 2 more sitting weeks, and they are completely out of ideas on issues that are genuinely important to Australians. And I can tell you that this issue about the public ownership of the NBN is almost the most furthest thing from the minds of the average Australian at the moment. And, you know, I get around the electorate, I talk to people, I'll stand outside a supermarket or walk through the park. You know, I can tell you none of them are coming up to me saying, geez, I really think that we should change that piece of legislation about the potential future sale of the NBN because I'm really worried about that. No, what they're saying is, I'm really worried about my grocery bill. I'm really worried about my electricity bill. And what are we seeing from this Labor government? Not much on those issues. And in fact, we know that this is really just a sneaky distraction because not even the government itself has been talking about the NBN. In fact, the Prime Minister himself last mentioned this on the 3rd of July, and it's only been mentioned a few times in Parliament this whole year. Now, I'll give credit to people where it's due, but I'm just thinking that there's something quite cynical about this whole thing. And maybe part of it is in what we saw from the member for Richmond, who is one of the better performing local members out of a very bad government, I'll give her that. Quoting, maybe using this time in the public domain that's streamed out to lounge rooms across Australia and watched frivolously on various social media channels about how amazing the coverage is in suburbs like Kingscliff and Newrybar, and that's all fantastic, but that's not actually what this bill is about. This bill is a bill to try and amend some provisions of legislation that was brought in almost 14 years ago to the day. And the irony of this being the distraction tactic that was chosen by the PM has given us some time now as an opposition to really delve into the history of this. And what I love more than anything in life is a dose of irony. And can I tell you that the biggest dose of irony that I think we've found in our subsequent research is that at a time when we all know the Prime Minister was famously the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, and I understand he was very concerned about how aeroplanes were getting around at that time, but he momentarily showed an interest in the NBN. Almost 14 years ago to the day. Second reading speech to this place on Thursday the 25th of November 2010. So the Prime Minister himself actually tabled the legislation which says in his speech, quote, "It also sets out arrangements for the eventual sale of the Commonwealth stake in the company once the NBN rollout is complete, including provisions for independent and parliamentary reviews prior to any privatisation and for the Parliament to have the final say on the sale." So I'm just finding this quite curious that 14 years later the Prime Minister has now felt it's the time to go back on what he thought was a pretty good idea then by amending these provisions with the 7 pages of flimsy legislation that's been put forward. And it would seem to support the fact that the whole basis of this is really nothing more than a splash of a headline. Perhaps it's a distraction, but I think it's probably something more. And what we can really know from this period of time, we go back to 2010, another Labor luminary who was right in on this NBN action at the time, Senator Stephen Conroy, was going ballistic in the media with press release after press release, talking, and in fact the press release that was issued on the 22nd of November 2010 is headed. This is what the heading was: "Government committed to sale of NBN Co." again, finding this extraordinary, that the very people who are now trying to save the NBN from some fanciful sale offering were actually the ones that created the vehicle and the idea for the whole thing in the first place. And Senator Conroy was very, very clear in what he was expecting at the time, and the Prime Minister, as he was then as the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport when he gave his second reading speech, very, very clear. Senator Conroy said the Gillard government remained firmly committed to selling its stake in NBN Co after the network was fully built and operational, subject to market conditions and security considerations. Quote, "The government has always said any sale of NBN Co will be the subject of a Productivity Commission inquiry before any sale takes place." And they clearly thought about this a lot, because there's an entire process that's set up with, as we might describe in the modern vernacular, guardrails, so that this thing would go really well and maximise the public interest and the financial outcome. But it just seems extraordinary, again, that I reflect that in 2024, 14 years, almost to the day after this press release, I'm standing in this same place now with Labor, this Labor government, undoing the very thing that they set out to achieve. And I find some of this really quite interesting, in that there were some very clear steps set out as to how any potential sale could take place. Now, I'm just going to step through those, because this is not something that a third party could just run out there, stick it on the internet with a for sale sign for the highest bidder. It's not like that. The legislation is very clear, and perhaps to give them some credit, they'd thought this through. It provides about 5 simple steps that would need to be attended to before any sale could be completed. So firstly, the NBN has to be complete, and we know that's the case. It's been declared by the Minister at the time that the NBN for this purpose is complete. But then steps 2, 3, 4 and 5, on my understanding, are nowhere near happening. The first one is that the Productivity Commission would need to be requested to conduct a 12-month inquiry. The next step would be that we would then have a parliamentary joint committee to consider the Productivity Commission's 12-month inquiry report. It would then need to be declared ready for sale, and ultimately there would need to be a decision of both houses of the parliament for this to go ahead. So this framework has been in place, as I said, for 14 years. 14 years, the same framework. Nothing's changed since the Prime Minister first walked in here in November 2010 and introduced this legislation. And there has been absolutely no mention of this from the Coalition. There's been no suggestion of a sale. There's been no suggestion of a change in the approach to the sale. What we've been doing as a Coalition is remaining firmly focused on the things that matter to Australians. And this stunt, quite frankly, is not one of those things. Perhaps, it's the ghosts of the Labor government's past that they're trying to save this sale from, that somehow the then Prime Minister, concocted some sort of landmine that the Prime Minister is now going to step on 14 years later. This is all complete and utter nonsense. I think what's more likely, and having seen the Labor Party in operation over many years, I think what's more likely is we're going to see, this kind of corflute campaign at the next election. Labor, make no mistake, there is nothing that Labor loves better than a policy that they can fit onto a corflute. So I'm just wondering what these corflutes are going to say. Maybe one of them will say, keep the NBN in public hands.
Order,
Maybe one will say,
order.
quote,
No loud giggling, please.
cheaper internet. I love the enthusiasm shown by the member for Lingiari because it actually, her engagement on this issue actually would suggest to me that, having recently seen the successful CLP election in the Northern Territory, where the Labor government utterly failed on a number of fronts, I think she knows exactly what I mean about how the Labor Party will run the next federal campaign. It'll all fit either on a postage stamp size or the back of a coaster, but more likely it will fit on a corflute. This Labor government thinks they can create some kind of distraction. And the Prime Minister thought he could distract Australians away from his troubles. But now that it's grown into something else, as I said, the member for Richmond's talking about how great the tower coverage is and gives them a reason to talk about it. That's fantastic. But it's a distraction from the issues that are important to Australians. This government thinks that by creating a shiny ball over here of public ownership of NBN, when they're having an entire Seinfeld episode of their own about whether it can or can't be sold or will or won't be, they are hoping that Australians are not going to focus on this government's failures when they're casting their ballot at the next election. But unfortunately for this Labor government, they severely underestimate what Australians know is going on in their household budgets, and that is that this NBN sham of a bill is actually the last thing that Australians are thinking about right now. They want relief from their hip pocket. They want relief from cost of living pressures. They want to see their mortgage payments going down. And none of those things are done by a government who's too busy chasing the corflute headline.
I thank the member for Fadden. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Deputy Speaker. And by his own admission, the previous speaker spoke for 15 minutes about nothing, and I tend to agree with him. I just make a couple of observations here. The first would be that this is either not an important piece of legislation, it's a distraction, we shouldn't be interested in it, or it is so significant that the opposition has made the decision to vote against safeguarding the NBN. So it's really up to those opposite to explain what their position is, why they wouldn't want to safeguard it, and indeed why the issues that they profess to care about, such as supporting cost of living measures like free TAFE or housing legislation or debt relief for students, are positions that they are determined to vote against. So there is a bit of confusion that I am experiencing right now, Deputy Speaker, I'll be honest, given the contribution of the previous speaker, and I think it would be really valuable to understand whether they think this bill is so unimportant that they are going to just dismiss it, or it is so important that they are determined to oppose it and vote against it. I really would invite those opposite to work with us to both safeguard the NBN and to also commit to the cost of living relief measures that our government has sensibly put forward. I think that it is really important to show bipartisan support for cost of living relief. I think people in communities right across Australia would love to see that, and I think that invitation is an open one to those opposite to support our sensible measures. The reason that this is such a important bill to have before the House is because we know that Labor were the party that had the vision to put the NBN forward and to implement a national broadband network for this country, which would mean that people in our communities could be connected and would have world-class internet access. Now, unfortunately, we saw that was undermined and compromised when the coalition came to power in 2013. And it's why we want to make sure that now we are in government, that we take the opportunity to safeguard the very important national asset that is the national broadband network. We've unfortunately seen too often the tendency for those opposite to cut and gut public assets. I'm from Victoria. We still have a long memory in terms of the legacy of Jeff Kennett and what his state government did to our state, and the fact that schools closed and we are now having to reopen public schools right across the state as a result of the fact that they did not respect and did not treat with due regard the public sector and public assets like schools, like hospitals, like so many other important public services. We know, unfortunately, that it does seem to be in the DNA of those opposite to cut public services and to privatise assets and utilities that probably are best served by being in public hands. And that's why we're putting forward this bill today to amend the National Broadband Network Companies Act of 2011 to ensure ongoing public ownership of the NBN. This bill is going to make it really clear to Australian people that we have a deep, deep commitment to the ongoing sustainability and efficiency of the NBN, and we want to keep it in public hands. We've supported strong regulatory oversight already, and we've already settled a special access undertaking with the ACCC to cap wholesale prices. We're really worried about what those opposite might do if they ever, and I'm worried about this, got access to this side of the House and sat on these benches, because we know that not only do they like to reduce services and cut costs in ways that have detrimental effects on our community, they also like to sell off public assets. We are absolutely committed in keeping the NBN in public hands. And we are incorporating new wording into the existing Act to make clear the preservation of NBN in public ownership is an explicit requirement, removing provisions in the Act relating to the NBN co-sale scheme. We strongly believe that the NBN needs to stay in full government ownership to support the ongoing upgrade of the network and ensure ongoing regulatory oversight of NBN wholesale pricing, keeping broadband affordable for all Australians. We know how important the NBN is for connectivity. I think most of us could not imagine our lives without being online, being able to have easy and affordable access to the internet. It is vital for all parts of our lives, whether it be work, whether it be education, whether it be leisure, whether it be keeping in contact with loved ones. And so we know that we need to be a responsible government and safeguard and protect this important public asset. We made our commitment clear in the updated Statement of Expectations in 2022 that the NBN needs to stay in government hands. Government ownership is essential to deliver the strategy for a more connected Australia, including rolling out more fibre in the fixed-line network, planning for the transition to next-generation satellites and modernising universal service obligations. I think the other thing that's really important to understand and remember here is that the internet and the NBN are evolving all the time as technology evolves. And so it will be best delivered through government when we're able to have that flexibility and those obligations for services to our communities to upgrade the system appropriately. This is crucial national infrastructure with cybersecurity and national security imperatives too, which absolutely, and I'd hope that both sides of the House can agree on this, require strong government oversight to ensure that we protect national and cybersecurity requirements. This is best delivered through ongoing government ownership. Any future sale of the NBN would likely involve foreign ownership, which raises potentially serious national sovereignty and security risks, and I'd urge those opposite to be mindful of those. The former coalition government had taken the initial legislative steps to prepare the NBN for sale. which is quite worrying, especially in context of what I've just described in relation to national security, including declaring the network built and fully operational in 2020. The Coalition also supported an NBN submission to increase wholesale prices on their core products by 3% and to bolster their income streams in preparation for sale. And this was ultimately rejected by Labor and rejected by the ACCC. I mentioned earlier, Deputy Speaker, the memory of some of us in terms of coalition governments selling off public assets, and my memories in Victoria. Of course, who can forget the sale of Telstra under the Howard government? This is a prime example of the coalition making promises on prices and services for telecommunications that were not delivered. And the sale of Telstra also deprived the government of leverage to roll out fibre broadband in Australia, necessitating the Rudd government's establishment of the NBN in the first place. Our government has been consulting on regional telecommunication services and has received feedback from communities, particularly in rural and regional Australia, that there is strong support for the NBN to stay in government ownership. We know that keeping the NBN in public ownership is absolutely essential to continue to provide modern, accessible and affordable communication services for all Australians, no matter where they live. So I would hope that those opposite can recognise the importance of giving the public assurances about the future of the NBN. I hope that those opposite can recognise the importance in relation to cybersecurity, national security, of ensuring the NBN remains in government hands, and I'm really pleased to commend the bill to the House. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for Chisholm, and I call the member for Riverina.
Yet another political stunt by this Albanese Labor government, this desperate government. As usual, absolutely no real considerations to the issues which are having such an impact on regional Australians. Because I think, actually I know, Deputy Speaker, Labor neither understands nor worst cares about those Australians who live over the sandstone curtain, the great dividing range. How about this government just do something different for a change? How about this government just focus on improving regional phone connectivity? And they'll say, oh, but we are. But when they brought out their election promises, so-called improving connectivity round, and it was election promises, all of the mobile phone towers, all of the upgrades to the existing towers went to Labor Party seats. And they came in here, they said they would have transparency and integrity over, there'd be no pork barrelling under us. Well, shame on them, because the colour-coded spreadsheets, at least ours had a bit of colour, theirs were all red. Theirs were all red when it came to upgrading mobile phone towers. And residents are rightly concerned. I know that just 2 months ago I spoke about the issue both locally back in my Riverina electorate and in this place too, about the issue of mobile connectivity affecting residents in and around Ardlethan and Camara. Now, they're not big towns, but they're very important agricultural entities, districts. Ardlethan had a tin mine which flourished for many, many years until the world price of that commodity dropped through the floor. The big wheat-growing areas, big sheep-producing areas. But residents there shouldn't have to climb the nearest wheat silo to get coverage, to get reception, to get at least just one bar on their mobile phone, particularly during harvest, particularly if there's a medical emergency. That is just not right. Farmers these days expect better, farmers demand better, farmers deserve better, particularly as though since we had the deregulation of the wheat industry, farmers need their mobiles whilst they're up the paddock, whilst they're on the chaser bins, whilst they're on the header, whilst they're stripping their crops, to be able to sell those crops, to be able to sell that grain. Once upon a time you just took it to the silo and the wheat board took care of, and you got the price that, depending on hard wheat or whatever quality and quantity you produced. But not these days. You can actually sell the wheat. There's a huge market for it. You can't sell it if you can't get mobile coverage, and you lose. And farmers tend to sometimes lose tens of thousands of dollars simply because they can't get the right price at the right time because they've got no damn coverage, and it's just not good enough. And it's not good enough. And this government comes in here with legislation that is not going to fix the farmers at Ardlethan and Kamara's area now, in that district. Now, I know that Telstra is working closely with the farmers, and I appreciate the efforts that Southern Regional Manager Chris Taylor is going to help them. I know there's been a delay in that, and I know Telstra and Mr Taylor have been up front with the residents, but it's incumbent upon this government to show a little bit of care, a little bit of concern over those issues affecting those sort of regional people. Now, I know the benefits that bringing mobile phone connectivity, and I appreciate this is about broadband, but it's all about data. It's all about having connections to the rest of the world, how much the benefits bring to areas. I remember unveiling a tower in Goobaragandra, and I know Tony Karamaleski there in what was then the Tumut Shire, now Snowy Valleys, how pleased he was because he said that'll save lives. He said that will actually save lives, and he fought so hard. And the benefits it brought to a little place called Maringo in the Young District, Hilltops Regional Council area. The number of businesses, small businesses run by women in that area who were going to be then connected to the world because of the connection that we'd provided through the mobile phone tower at Maringo.
Order. It being 7:30, I propose the question that the House do now adjourn.